Welcome, everyone, to our 12th Omega Conversation. We're so happy to have you all with us. Today, our conversation is helping kids navigate anxiety in turbulent times, and our guest is our dear friend, Jennifer Cohen Harper. Because the pandemic has not allowed us all to gather together here on the Omega campus, I just wanted to remind us all, this being our 12th, there are three different ways, actually, that Omega is staying connected with our community during these times. One is the Omega Conversations that you've all taken part in. Another one is our online Facebook community. If any of you are not a part of that but are interested in joining, one of my colleagues will place the URL, the link to it in the chat for Zoom, and you're welcome to join. Jen will actually be doing a follow-up to this conversation today, next Friday at 10:30 in the morning. So for those of you who have kids and you're really wanting to know more about this topic, it'll be a live conversation next Friday at 10:30. And then the final area where we are also trying to stay connected to everyone is through our online programs, online courses. For those of you who are fans of Jon Kabat-Zinn, he will be teaching a course this Saturday with his son, Will. And you can also go online and find the link to that. Fortunately for us, we have Jen showing up on all three platforms. And so today she will be part of our Omega Conversation. And I'd just love to introduce her. So Jennifer Cohen Harper, she's an educator, she's an author, she's a public speaker, and she's also the mother of two young girls. Her work is focused on supporting children's, teens, and their families to develop strong inner resources so that they can navigate through tough times. And the tools that she uses are yoga and mindfulness. She's the founder of Little Flower Yoga, which brings embodied mindfulness programming into our schools and our communities across the country. She's also the immediate past president of the Yoga Service Council, where I first met her and have worked with her for years. She's still currently gives counsel to them, and was one of the initiators of the Yoga Service Conference that has taken place here for many years at Omega. So it's my pleasure to introduce you all to our dear friend, Jennifer Cohen Harper.
Well, thank you so much, Carol, and thank you everybody for joining. It's really incredible to see so many people here interested in this topic and really committed to supporting our kids through what is just an incredible upheaval in their lives and all of our lives. So I'm really happy to be here. And man, watching that little pre-roll of Omega teachers and the campus really kind of reconnected me to what an amazing community this is and how much of a huge support the Omega community has been in my life for about 12 years now. So I couldn't be more grateful to be on this platform with you, Carol, and Omega, and continuing the conversations in this way. So thanks so much for joining, everybody.
Fabulous. So why don't we jump right in? Just so the audience is aware, what we're going to do is Jen and I will have a bit of a conversation. I'll ask her questions, do an interview process. Then she will do a practice for all of us of support, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. If anywhere along the line you're interested in asking questions, feel free to raise your hand. You go down where it says participant, and you find the thing that says raise your hand, and go ahead and raise your hand. And then at the end, when we're going through questions, I will just go through and we'll choose people. So let's begin, and let's start kind of with the 101. And while there are probably a myriad of causes for anxiety for children, what are some of the most common causes that you see or that you've heard of?
Thanks, Carol. So you're right. Like, of course, we probably all know, like, there's as many causes of anxiety as there are kids, right? It's a really individual thing. But when I look across the board at all of the many kids that I've worked with, including the ones that I'm raising in my house, I find that usually anxiety and what's causing it falls into two broad categories. And I find it really useful to think about these things as I'm noticing what's happening with my kids so that I have a quick go-to. Okay, like, is it this or is it this? Is it both? What do I do? And those two things are overstimulation and disconnection. And you might be thinking, okay, but like my kid's afraid of this, or, you know, there's all these specific things. And I would encourage you to consider that oftentimes the things that bring out anxiety in our kids are rooted in some kind of overstimulation, whether it's overstimulation in the environment, the overstimulation of the intrusive thoughts in their own mind, right? A fear that they don't have enough information about, so they're making up stories about in their head, right? Overstimulation comes in a lot of forms. And when our kids are receiving a lot of input from the external world, or there's a lot of intrusive thoughts or rumination going on in their mind, for me, it's helpful to think overstimulation. Because our kids are capable of processing so much, absorbing so much, bringing their resiliency skills to so much. But when there's too much, right, then it leads to overwhelm and anxiety. And we got to remember, anxiety is not about what's happening, it's about our experience of it, right? So overstimulation is a huge cause of anxiety. And if the anxiety is coming from something else, being overstimulated makes it worse. I would also put in the overstimulation category things like a lot of changes to their routine, which of course lots of our kids, maybe all of our kids, are experiencing now, right? So when there's not a lot of predictability in their life, when their routines are disrupted, the impact on their nervous system is one of overstimulation, because there's a lot of new coming at them and they have to adjust a lot. Right? So overstimulation is a big cause of anxiety. And then disconnection. Right? So our kids, again, can handle a lot. They can handle a lot more when they feel like somebody sees and understands their experience, when they don't have to go through it alone, right? When they feel deeply connected. And in this moment, when their school's been closed and their grown-ups, their most important grown-ups, may be going through a lot of stressors of their own, it's easy for disconnection to happen, even in really, really loving households. So I know for me, with my girls, like, I have to be really careful that I'm not so absorbed in my own anxiety, my own stressors, my own worries, that they're experiencing that as disconnection.
Fabulous. Thank you. And so kids also pick up coping mechanisms to help them with their stressors. And so what are some of the more common coping mechanisms you've seen in kids lately, or just in general?
Yeah. So there's, again, a lot of different behaviors that come up because kids don't always understand that what they're feeling, well, they often don't understand that what they're feeling is anxiety, and they don't always know what to do with it. So what they experience is big emotion, and then they try to find ways, they try to find outlets for that, that sometimes don't actually meet their needs or get them what they want, right? So they might get really angry. It's a really common response to anxiety for kids is anger. On the flip side of that, a lot of our kids shut down. They disassociate, they disconnect. That overstimulation is so much, and maybe they don't feel safe expressing their anger, or they feel like they need to keep the peace or keep everyone happy. So instead of allowing that feeling to come out as anger, they withdraw. And that could look like really wanting like more screen time and just plugging in to screens, or something that can distract them, something that they can kind of cut everybody off and not have to manage. Some of our younger kids, I find one of the first predictors of rising anxiety is whining. It's happening in my house a lot right now. So I have a 3-year-old and a almost 8-year-old. And one of the things that I've really come to understand is that when kids have anxiety, but are trying to control themselves, right? Sometimes like they want to cry, they want to scream, they want to rage, but they're trying so hard to control themselves. And it comes out as whininess, sometimes as clinginess, right? As really needing to be close to us. And of course that has its own challenges for us as the grown-up, right? But I think the first step to being able to support our kids is trying to recognize and open our minds to the way that all of these somewhat frustrating behaviors might be their way of saying, hey, I'm having a really hard time. Can you find a way to help me?
Perfect. Thank you. Now, you talk a bit about how some of the dominant things that we say as adults can actually shut children down rather than help them deal with their anxiety. And one of them is like, calm down, how that actually has the opposite effect. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for asking. Well, I think all of us can probably relate to this, right? Like if you just imagine yourself having a hard time, your anxiety rising, overwhelmed from the world, like your own thoughts in your head, and somebody tells you to calm down, right? You could even share in the chat if you want, like, how does that make you feel, right? What do you want to say back to them? Like, is it helpful? And I think, most of us would feel that it's not, because what it is dismissive, right? And our kids feel that too. And many of the things that I think we do as adults when our kids are in this state of anxiety, especially if the behaviors that are accompanying it are a bit of a trigger for us for any number of reasons. A lot of what we do first is try to make ourselves more comfortable. And when we say calm down, or we focus on getting a kid to stop screaming, or when we sort of set these conditions for like your behavior has to change first and then we can address the challenge, a lot of what we're inadvertently saying to the kid is, I actually don't understand why you're doing this, and I don't really want to. Right? What I want you to do is change your behavior. And they don't know if we'll ever get around to meeting the underlying need. Right? So when we say calm down to a kid, sometimes it comes out as like really dismissive. So they push back at us, understandably. Sometimes what we're asking them to do is not something that they're physically capable of doing in the moment. Right? So we have to remember we're dealing with children with underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes, or I like to say prefrontal cortexes that are absolutely perfectly developed for their age, right? For their developmental stage. But we expect them to do what sometimes we can't even do, which is to take huge emotional experiences and just put the lid on them and talk calmly and rationally about it. Right? That's often, almost always, an unrealistic expectation. So when our kids are struggling and we ask them to do something that they're not capable of doing, the end result is increased frustration, increased judgment for them of themselves, increased disconnection, right? Because what we're giving them is actually telling them that we don't get them. Right? If we ask them or tell them to do something they can't do, we're disconnecting from them. Their experience is one of disconnection because we can't possibly understand if this is what we're asking. Right? So, there's a lot we can talk about here, but I think the most important thing to consider is when our kids are escalated, they need to know that we are attuning to them, that we're there for them, that we recognize their experience. And sometimes we can do that through words, like putting names to their emotions or just nodding and saying, I hear you, that sounds so frustrating, depending on what they're giving. But sometimes, and with my oldest daughter, I have this issue a lot. Sometimes almost no matter what I say, she wants to push back on it, because talking is not good for her in that moment. And I need to find ways to reduce stimulation and increase connection before she's going to be capable of talking to me about whatever the situation is. right? And that might mean something as simple as saying, like, let's go for a walk together, right? Get outside, out of the house, or let's toss a ball back and forth to each other, right? If you can find nonverbal ways, especially if like a kid's escalating, you say something and they scream back at you, that's like a big red flag. They don't need to be punished. They don't need to be yelled at. You don't need to yell back at them. You need to find a nonverbal way to increase connection, so that their nervous system can remember they're not in it alone and that you're on their side.
Nice. To go along with that, I love a philosophy that you have, and it's just this belief that we all have anxiety. So everyone has anxiety, and rather than trying to fix it in ourselves, and also rather than trying to fix it in our children, you advocate the strength-based approach. Can you share with us a little bit about how you see the strength-based approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking this. I think this is really important because I also want to clarify for folks who might be listening, we do all experience anxiety, and some people experience anxiety in much more intense ways that have a much stronger impact, negative impact on their day-to-day life than others. We all have different nervous systems, and we all have different experiences that allow us to interpret what happens to us in different ways. That being said, it's been my consistent experience that nobody from 2 to as old as anyone I've ever met wants to feel like someone's trying to fix them. And that is a deficit model, right? That tells people, including ourselves, that something is wrong with us if we have what is a very human experience. And I feel really strongly that I don't ever want to tell the children in my life that there's a part of them that they should be trying to get rid of, or that there's a part of them that's wrong and needs to be fixed, or that this big emotional experience, something that makes them human, right, is something that is harmful to them. Right? And I believe and have seen borne out in my work that we can all, in various ways and at different capacities, depending on how old we are and how much we've put into it, we can learn to have a more compassionate relationship with our anxiety, right? That we can learn about what the physical and emotional symptoms of anxiety are. We can change the way we relate to it. We can have a conversational relationship with anxiety. Hey, there's that anxiety coming back again. I wonder what it's asking me. I wonder what it has to tell me, right? And we can develop a more friendly relationship with this part of ourselves. And when we do that, right, we reaffirm that all the parts of us are welcome, right? It doesn't work to tell a kid, you need to get rid of this feeling. You need to get rid of this experience. It doesn't work on so many levels because usually they're not capable of it. If they do, it often results in a larger numbing of the emotions, right? So we can't sort of selectively pick and choose like when to be embodied and when not, when to allow our emotions to be present and when not. It's very hard to do that. If we make a habitual practice of pushing away our emotions, what often happens is we push away the good ones too, right? Because we're cutting ourselves off from our embodied experience of our own emotions. So when we try to tell kids to get rid of anxiety, we're not just getting rid of the anxiety, right? We're getting rid of their capacity to have a healthy, embodied, curious relationship with their huge range of emotional experiences. And that's not what I want for my kids. I'm guessing that's not what you all want for your kids. So when I say to come from a strength-based approach, that doesn't mean that we're like, oh, I feel like terrible and that's a good thing. It means, oh, some things that are not comfortable are coming up right now, but I don't have to be afraid of them. I can be curious about them. And of course, for kids, that has to happen in relationship, right? That has to happen in relationship before it can happen for them on their own. But if they can be curious about their experience, if they could be supported through that experience, then they can experiment with the things that help them move through it without trying to cut themselves off from it. right? And it comes back to that whole, like, there's no way out but through kind of mentality. And if we help them build their capacity to be in relationship with their anxiety, then it's almost like a superpower. Then it's like, whatever happens, right? I might need to like activate or power up or engage with the world in a way that says this isn't okay and I need to change it, but the feeling itself won't drag me down. All right, I could keep going on that forever, but I think I should pause.
That's great. Actually, we'll start back. We'll answer the next one. Will actually have a lot to do with where we started. The theme of this conversation was helping kids through turbulent times, and we've been living in a pandemic now for the last few months, and we're not sure yet what the fall will bring. And so, how can people support their kids during this time? And maybe even recognize anxiety as it's coming up.
Yeah. So this has been an interesting time for our kids. I would say most of the kids that I've been in contact with, their anxiety has been increasing. It is important to recognize that there may be some kids for whom like school produced so much anxiety that this time has actually been relaxing, that this time has been good for them. And it's an interesting way to think about your kids, like what happened when school was taken away, right? Like just be curious about your kids' experience. Don't assume that they are having a particular experience based on your experience. And as we think about school being shut down, maybe their summer camps have been shut down, they haven't been able to see their friends. There's a lot of uncertainty around back to school in September. What all of this is for our kids is overstimulating because of so much change and uncertainty, right? So I'm going to talk specifically about the pandemic and how we can talk to our kids. But just before we do, I just want to note anything we can do to reduce stimulation at this time. Well, stimulation is not just like a lot of noise and bright lights, right? It's like a lot of changes in routine, a lot of information and input, it's screens, it's a mess, although my house is a mess, so I'm not gonna but the visual, the activities, all of it, anything that we can do to reduce stimulation for our kids will help them process all of these changes, right? So that's a starting place. And then as we think about talking to our kids about back to school and answering their questions, I think we have to ask our kids questions because all our kids are different. So, I think we need to ask our kids, like, what do you know about the coronavirus? Do you still have any questions about it? What are you thinking about the possibility of going back to school? Does anything about it make you nervous? And give them the space to bring up the conversation. For them to be annoyed and say they don't want to talk about it, and for you to say, the door's open. I've been thinking about it. You might have been thinking about it. I'll check in with you a few more times, right? And give them openings, give them the opportunity to absorb your question, think about it, and come back to you. And they might be concerned about things like getting sick, right? We've been saying all this time, stay away from everybody. And now it's like, go be with everybody. So acknowledge, like, what does it mean to go back to school? They might have questions about actually getting sick, and they might be upset about the idea of wearing a mask, or they may really be nervous about going back to school because they've enjoyed this time at home, or vice versa. So we've got to talk with our kids and give them the space to say what they're feeling. If they're like a closed wall, then we can talk about what we're nervous about. Right? Like I might say something like, I've been thinking a lot about back to school and me going back to work, and I'm a little nervous about wearing a mask for so long and like how that might feel, and just like leave it and let them think about it. And then no matter what we can always do, no matter what the fears are, no matter what the concerns are, is help our kids find ways that they can take action on their own behalf and others' behalf. Right? So things like, okay, if we're worried about a mask, well, maybe we have a little bit of time. We can try a few different versions, do some practice runs, put some on the stuffies if our kids are little, right? And work together to say what's scary about this or uncomfortable about this, and what can we do about it? If you're worried about getting sick at school, we can remind them simple things like, this is what washing your hands does, and find those little YouTube videos that like show the germs running away from the soap, right? Reminding them of simple things that they can do to take action. If they're nervous about going back to school after so much time at home and feeling like disconnected, some of the things maybe you all did as kids too, of just having like a little rock that like one stays at home and one goes to school with them and they can squeeze it anytime, like reaffirming that we're connected, right? This really intense family time for a lot of kids is going to be hard to transition away from. So we want to think about ways that we can keep connected with our kids in their heart, so they can remember that even though they might be walking out of the house, they're not in it alone. Again, another thing that maybe your questions, maybe you'll have some questions about it in the Q&A. There's a lot to talk about, but I hope that is a helpful start.
Great. Jen, so much of what you teach kids and also teach teachers to take into the schools is about embodied mindfulness. So I thought perhaps now might be a great opportunity for us to just experience a little of that before we move into the Q&A. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to do a short practice with you all. You can do it in your chair. It's going to be really simple. And when Carol talks about me sharing embodied mindfulness skills and helping our kids build inner resources, the inner resources that I'm thinking about and teaching about are the resources of our body, right? How we can use our body to help support ourselves, to help change our experience, the resource of our breath, how we can use our breath to help manage our nervous system, and the resource of our mindset, how we can use things like perspective taking and self-talk to change how we relate to the situation. So I thought I'd just do a short practice with you where we're going to move our body a little, we're going to breathe a little, and you can notice how it feels, and then I'm really happy to take any questions that I can help you with. So let's just sit up tall. So you can stay in your chair. If you're in a chair, you can do this standing, sitting on the floor, wherever you are. But get as tall as you can. And then bring a hand to your heart and a hand to your belly. And if it feels good to close your eyes, close your eyes. If not, you can keep them open. It's no problem. And start to notice your breath. And before you make any attempt to change the way you're breathing, just notice it. Does your breath feel steady or choppy, long or short? Can you feel your body moving with your breath? And then slowly start to move your breath in and out through your nose and see if you can find a steady, even rhythm. So your inhale and your exhale are about the same length. And as you start to slow your breath down, see if you can feel your belly and your chest rising and falling with your breath. And now ask yourself, how am I doing right now? And don't worry too much about the answer. Just put the question in there and maybe let a word or two bubble up. Right? How am I doing right now? And take a few more slow breaths in and out. And then bring your hands down onto your knees or into your lap. And the next time you breathe in, roll your shoulders back and lift your chest. Like a little seated cat and cow. So breathe out and round your back. And breathe in and open. And now the next time you breathe in and open your arms as well and get as big as you can be. Like really, really get big. Stretch out every finger. And then as you breathe out, give yourself a really good hug, a really tight squeeze. We're gonna do it a few more times. So get as big as you can be. And now bring the opposite arm on top. 2 more times. Get really big and get really small. Breathe in and open. Switch arms to close. And now breathe in and open, but this time bring your arms straight up. So get really tall. You can't see my fingers, but they're wiggling. Whenever I stretch my arms out or get tall, it always seems to help to just give a little wiggle and then take a gentle twist to one side. And come back to the middle and over to the other side. And come back to the middle. And now as we bring our arms down, give them a really good shake. Like shake off anything that might need shaken off. More. Shake out your hands, every finger. Doesn't matter if it's moving all your skin in your face or whatever it is. Just really shake out your arms. And then I'm gonna ask you to do one thing that I'm not gonna do, which is stomp your feet, shake out your legs. If I do it, it's gonna shake my camera and the whole computer, right? But you can do it at home. So if it feels good, just stomp your feet, shake out your legs, let them make noise. Maybe even do it like your kids would do it. We'll do that for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Final stomp. And then bring your hands back to your heart and your belly. And just again, notice your breath. Maybe you can feel your heartbeat. Notice if anything feels different than it did 5 or 7 minutes ago before we started moving. Then I'm going to say just a few words that I hope you'll say either out loud after me or in your own mind. And this is how I end most of my sessions with my kids, with just some kind wishes for each other. So you can join in with me. I'm going to say, may we be happy. May we be healthy. May we be safe. May we be strong. Feel one more heartbeat. And then bring your hands down. And if your eyes are still closed, you can go ahead and open them up. So thanks for joining me, everyone. And if you feel like sharing any of what came up when you asked, how am I feeling right now? And if anything felt different, feel free to pop it into the chat box. If you want to keep it to yourself, that is absolutely okay too.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Now we're going to do Q&A. And so we're happy to have everyone join us and ask questions. The way that we're doing it is by raising hands if you'd like to talk to Jen directly. Otherwise, I'm going to start with a few questions that have come up from our Facebook group. And this one is from Christine. How do I deal with anxiety of leaving the house after being so hermetically secured at home? In my case, it's a 4-year-old. So maybe you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So 4 is such a tricky age, right? It's this place where our kids, they're smart and they're aware of so much. But they also are in a place where they naturally have some separation anxiety. They're naturally trying to figure out kind of what's safe, what's not, where are my boundaries, right? That's all still happening at 4. So after a situation like this, where it's like what's safe is to come really close and stay home, right? It's very natural that now separating from a caregiver, leaving the house that we've been saying is safe is really nerve-wracking. And my suggestion is to do it step by step, and to really acknowledge the fear, right? Oftentimes when we do this, especially with younger kids, we kind of tend to minimize their fear. We're like, it's no big deal, it's safe, don't worry. And we send a lot of like, it's okay, don't worry messages. That just kind of leaves them alone to deal with the problem, right? It doesn't actually soothe them. It just leaves them to try to figure it out themselves. So I would say really acknowledge it, right? Say, it can be really scary after doing one thing for so long to change it up and do something else. I get it. That can be scary. That can be hard. And we can do hard, scary things, right? Feeling scared is a feeling that is okay to feel. It's not a problem to be scared. It's a feeling that gives us information, right? So if you're scared about leaving the house, that's okay. That gives us information. We need to practice this. We need to take some time with it. We need to do it together. And maybe first it's just like opening the door and hanging out in the doorway and being like, does this feel scary? How's this? Oh, is this okay? All right, let's go out a few steps. Hey, can you stay right there if I take a step back, right? And making it playful, right? Without minimizing the reality of it, right? That it is in fact scary. And for 4-year-old, you can still pick them up. I would not recommend just picking your kid up and carrying them to the end of the street screaming and saying, see, nothing bad happened. I would say don't go that route. But what you can do is say, would this be a little less scary if I picked you up, right? Would it be a good step for us to take together, right? To do it with a piggyback ride first, right? So we're really close to each other. And if there's any problem, I'll let you know right away. Right, so those sort of step-by-steps, reminding the kid that you are strong, you can do this. I totally believe in you. And also, you're not crazy. This can be scary. I understand why you're scared and you're not in it alone, right? That like, you can do this, but you're not in it alone. You can do this, but you're not in it alone. Like, that's the message.
Great, thank you. I'm going to unmute Preeti, and then she's going to ask her question. Is that going to happen?
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry. I tried to unmute myself at the same time. I was doing too much. Jennifer, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's just so nice to connect with others around parenting. I think all of us are seeking a little more connection right now. I have 2 middle school daughters, and I think when your children are younger, there's a little bit more of a luxury of connecting on your own terms and things like that. And harder with older kids, you know, it's just more of a sell. And, you know, definitely understanding that some of these things need to become habits and routines in your home. I wonder if you have maybe some tips and tools for how to connect with older kids, and also maybe there's a little bit of a ladder of how to move from like logistical kind of things in your home and conversations with them into what kind of practices would be good to start out, maybe in an evening routine or a morning routine or something. I mean, we're all home together right now. What would be the easiest sell, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There is a luxury with younger kids, like in the way that we can kind of steer them. And often like our steering has to do with like what we would find interesting or fun or, you know, connecting. I think as our kids get older, one of the big challenges is to remind ourselves that if our goal is to connect, we have to really think about what would feel connecting to them, not what would feel connecting to us. And oftentimes we kind of as adults get into this trap of thinking that connecting is mostly through conversation. And that's not actually how the human experience works, right? And we can think about lots of examples where people who have shared experiences, even if there hasn't been a lot of talking, feel deeply connected to each other. Of course, like the most dramatic examples are like people who've been through war or traumas together, but it goes the other way. People who have positive experiences, even without conversation, often feel very connected. And I think as our kids get older, especially in those middle school years where they may really not want to talk with us as much, we have to really find ways to ask them if we can participate in their world. Whereas when our kids are littler, we're often bringing them into ours. And that may, I mean, I don't know your kids at all, right? So that may be like things we don't really want to do. Like, can I play this video game with you? Or can I sit here and you tell me about how it works, right? Watching movies with them that they want to watch. Jumping on a trampoline with them, right? Like oftentimes it's things that are part of their world. And as they get older, we're like, that's their world. This is my world. To connect, we need to go to their world, right? So I hope that helps. I can't tell you what to do other than like spy on your kid and what would surprise them. What would they feel like, oh, why is my parent like asking about this? They've never shown any interest. They might be a little like, why do you want to? Because they may think you're like trying to check it out or authorize it. Be like, I'm just interested in you and I want to know what you want to know. Like, I want to learn more about you, right? That's connecting, whether it's through a conversation or an action, watching and seeing what they're interested in and asking to be invited into their space, their world, their activities. That's a way of connecting with older kids. Now, your question about practice, I find that kids, regardless of their age, will ebb and flow in how much tolerance they have for being directed by a parent. And the whole point of these practices is that our kids are engaging in it in a way that helps them better understand themselves, that they can pay attention to their internal experience of it. So if they're doing it under pressure or duress, it kind of defeats the point, right? Like it defeats the point. But that doesn't mean we can't introduce it to them and bring it into our household. The best way that we can when our kids are like, I don't want to do that, is by letting them see our practice, right? So, this, again, it kind of puts it on us, right? So it might not be, oftentimes we come to these conversations with like, I don't want this for myself. I want to give it to my kid. But frequently the best way to give it to our kids is to do it ourselves and let them see it. Right. And then at that age in middle school, oftentimes they're really paying close attention to us, but they're not really interested in engaging with us around that. So if you kind of do your thing when it's visible to them, they might be more willing to try it behind closed doors. And I would also say things like books and card decks that are specifically made for teens. Right? Sometimes we do better just being like, here you go. I'm not part of it. I'm out, right? Because they want it to be their own. They don't necessarily want to talk to you about all these things that are going on, but giving them resources and just kind of not putting too much pressure on it. Like, I thought this might be interesting, but it's all you. That's how I would recommend starting.
Great. So the next question I'm going to take is actually from Facebook. It's from Adam. And his question is, or his statement is, my oldest son is 9 years old. He was newly diagnosed with ADHD and general anxiety. It's unfortunately apparent that his source of anxiety and uncertainty is the divorce of his mother and I. What are things above and beyond his counselor that I, as his father, can do for him? His mother and I are unable to communicate, and he's tried numerous times with her for their son's well-being, but that's not happening right now.
Yeah, that's such a hard situation, and I'm sorry that your son is going through this. I think there are a few things that I would keep in mind. At that age, oftentimes kids feel like their concerns are not valid or not going to be received. Sometimes they have concerns, they're not even quite sure what they are, or they start to come into this place where they really don't want to burden or upset their parents or rock the boat. Like when things are going well in relationship, that's often when we're least likely to bring up problems, right? Because we don't want to rock the boat. I would say my guess, not knowing your son, not knowing you, my guess would be that your son would probably welcome a very transparent, honest conversation about what's going on, and the opportunity to bring up fears, concerns, questions about the divorce in a container where they know you won't be reactive, right? And I'm not making any assumptions that you have been in the past, but sometimes when our kids ask questions that upset us, we get upset, right? And then they learn not to ask those questions, even if we're not upset with them, right? So I would try to find a way to communicate to your son, and maybe do it like while you're going for a walk or tossing a ball, right? So that there's something to do with the body to discharge energy during heightened emotions. I would say, I've been thinking about how this must feel to you, and I just really wanted to take some time to talk about like how this is all going for you. You must have some questions. And if your son says like, I don't have any questions, be like, really? Like, are you sure? Right? Really make sure that they feel like this is an open opportunity. And you may even have to tell them like, I have been taking some deep breaths. We're going to do this while we're walking. So even if stuff starts to get upsetting, like we're going to find a way to figure it out. Like ask me the questions you think are most going to upset me. I'm ready for them, right? Like we've got this, and really have an honest conversation. Now, with the ADHD, with this generalized anxiety diagnosis, I don't know how your son's relating to that or feeling about it, but I think it's really important when kids are newly diagnosed that we help them make sense of that in a strength-based way, right? So one way to think about having generalized anxiety is that we are a person who is highly sensitive to the world, and that can be a superpower, but it can also be hard. Right? It can also be hard. One way to think about ADHD is that we have the capacity to see many different things going on at the same time, and that can feel overwhelming. We also have the capacity to dive really, really deep and focus on something so much, but sometimes that can be tricky because we can almost get obsessed and not notice what else is going on, right? It's really important to help our kids make sense of these diagnoses in a way that doesn't get them thinking that they just suck, right? Like, I know that's not like the scientific term, but that can be how they feel. Like, I'm just broken. Stuff's wrong with me and there's nothing I can do about it. And when our kids start getting into that place, things start to spiral. So honest conversation, the way to go.
Thanks, Jen. I'm going to unmute Paula so that she can ask you her question.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been super helpful. I have a question about my older daughter. She's a teenager. And when she experiences like heightened emotions, especially sadness and depression, she definitely withdraws and wants to be alone. And my inclination is to honor that. At the same time, I worry and want to make that connection. And sometimes I feel like she doesn't feel like it's okay to be sad in my presence or depressed in presence of other people. Like she really wants to do it on her own. And so that's basically my question is like, when do I honor it and create that connection for her and continue to like send the message, like I can make room for sad. Like it's totally okay. You don't have to pretend to be any other way. You can just be with me and be sad. It's okay. You don't have to be alone allow her to be alone if that's really what she needs.
Yeah. She's really lucky to have you as a mom. It's really incredible that you're thinking in this way for her. And, there's two things that could, I think, help, probably more, but two that are coming to my mind. One is we got to let our kids see our sad. So many times we tell our kids it's okay to have all these emotions. I can handle it. You don't have to hide it. We tell them with our words, but we don't tell them with our actions because we don't want to scare them or because we think they can't handle it. And I remember when my daughter was about, 5 or so, she asked me, how come you never cry? And some people on this call might know me, and I cry a lot. And, I do this work for a living, and I've spent all these years practicing this, and still I was hiding my sad from my daughter, who is totally capable of handling it, and she noticed. And I was really grateful that she asked me that. And, I said, I do cry. And the fact that you don't see me cry, that's really interesting. Like, do you want to talk about why that is? And then I had to make a concerted effort to let her see my sad. And it was really uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me, but it helped her. It helped her. And then I had to go like, what else am I hiding from her? Am I not letting her see my anger? Am I not letting her see my overwhelm or my exhaustion or my frustration, right? Because anything that I'm hiding, any part of me that I'm hiding, she's learning that she's supposed to hide that too, right? So again, I don't know you, so I don't know if that's true for you, but it's something I would think about, like how much do the grownups in her life let her see their sad? And then I would it's so appropriate, especially for a teenager, to honor their desire to have time alone. And it's really important, but I understand why it would make you worry. And I think the time to bring it up is when things are good. And, just like kids don't want to bring stuff up to us when things are good, like we often don't want to bring up things with our kids because we don't want to like ruin a pleasant afternoon or something. But that's when they're most capable of talking about it. So when things are good, you can bring it up in a very low pressure way. You can say something like, I was just thinking about how, sometimes when you're upset or sad, you really want to be alone. And if that's what you want, I'm totally okay with it, 100% okay with it. But I was just wondering, like, what do you do? Like when you go to your room and you're sad, like, do you want to talk about it at all? Or you can also say, if you're ever upset and you don't want to be alone, I would be happy to make an agreement to like not talk, but just be together. Maybe like, I don't know, make some homemade ice cream or go for a walk or watch a movie, do something together, but make an actual commitment to like, if you don't want to talk, I can do that. Right. But just because you don't want to talk doesn't mean you have to not be in my presence. Like I would love to be with you no matter what feelings you're having, and we can talk or not talk. That's totally up to you. But then honor it. If you say you're not going to talk, this is like a huge challenge for me. Like if you say you're not going to talk, don't be like, do you want to talk now? Do you want to talk now? Got anything to say? Right. That's the challenge. If you say you're not going to talk, you have to just clamp it down and let them say the first thing. And don't be all like, don't talk with your face. Don't talk with your hugs. Just be there and let them come to you. Nobody wants to be pitied either.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
So here are two questions that are very similar. One is from Ariella on Facebook, and she said, what exactly do you mean by embodied relationship to emotions? Mm-hmm. And then Jane on Zoom is saying, how can we be more embodied? So do you want to talk about the embodied piece?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So when I say embodied relationship to emotion, I guess it kind of is a fancy way of saying being able to notice your emotions in your body, right? So every emotion comes with physical sensation. And a lot of the time, our body starts to have sensation around an emotion before our mind realizes that that's what we're feeling. Right? So frequently our body is actually giving us information about what we're feeling when our mind is still like confused and distracted and overstimulated, right? So but caveat, right? If we have learned in our life to push sensation away, if we've learned to ignore what our body feels like, if we've learned to ignore messages from our body, and there are lots of ways to learn that through trauma, but also through things like dieting, right? Things like kids being in a position where they're like, I'm not cold, put this coat on. I'm not cold. Yes, you are, right? All these little things and big things that happen to our kids that tell them, don't pay attention to your own body, pay attention to some outside authority instead, right? Often are disembodying our kids. So they learn to push away or ignore their physical sensations. And when they do that, they lose a part of their capacity to understand their emotional experiences, because the embodied experience of our emotions is a big part of how we make sense of what we're feeling. Right? So when I talk about this embodied relationship to our emotions, it's our ability to notice what's going on with our body, be curious about it, get information from it. And then if we can do that, we can also realize that this is a two-way street, right? Our body gives us information. We can also give our body information, right? Through self-talk. We can also go for a walk or do some yoga practice or dance, right? And change the physical sensations in our body, right? To help us change our emotional experience of the situation. Right? So there's a lot of ways that we can work with our body, but oftentimes our kids are working against their body by trying to just shut it off, shove it down. They kind of lock up and freeze instead of recognizing, oh, these are sensations related to an emotion, right? And I can listen to them, and then I can create different sensations and notice if anything changes. Right? So I hope that answers the question or starts to answer it. Now, the second part of that question, like how can we get more embodied? How can we practice embodiment? There's two really important things that we can do as parents, as caregivers. One is day to day in daily life, we can teach our kids to honor the messages of their body. So, not pushing kids to eat more when they say they're full, which I admit I have a really hard time with, right? But things like when it's safe, right? Is it safe to not wear a coat? Okay, let it go, right? We want to encourage our kids to notice what's happening in their body. When they're playing, dancing, moving, we can ask them questions like, what do your legs feel like right now, right? We're just trying to reconnect or deepen the connection between their mind and their body. And by that, I just mean their ability to notice physical sensation in their body.
Thanks, Jen. So I think that's got to be our last question, unfortunately. I know there's still a few people who have questions, and I might just really encourage you. There's a few things you can do. You can go to the Omega Live conversation next Friday at 10:30. Jen will be talking to one of my colleagues there. More information will come up. She also has an online course that's coming up all around this topic. It's fabulous, very practical. For those of you that were asking about practices, there are several practices in that course too. And she has a website that you all, Jen, why don't you type your website into the message thing so people can just go straight to you too and find you, because I'm sure there's a lot of other information there. Just really thank you so much, Jen, for this today. It's been fabulous for us. And I know as people are home and we're spending so much more time with our kids because of this pandemic, we're getting to see a lot more that maybe in our everyday world before wasn't so clear to us. So these tools, I think, the Omega Conversations, our hope is that we can inspire people and offer tools for you to take home and use in your daily life. And Jen is definitely one of those people that does both. So thank you so much. I also just want to say to the audience so that you're aware, we have been doing these conversations weekly. We will be shifting starting this month. And so they will be going to a monthly conversation starting in August. The very first Thursday in August will be our next conversation. And then in September, our co-founder, Elizabeth Lesser, will be doing a book launch. Her next book will be coming out. And so our Omega conversation will be with Elizabeth, and I think it will be Maria Shriver interviewing her. So I think it'll be a great conversation don't miss that one. And if you're not already on our e-list, we send out e-blasts about all of this information, but please join the e-list so that you can hear about each of these conversations as they're coming up. Again, thank you all for being here today. And thank you, Jen, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate the opportunity and the questions, and I hope you just remember, like, what our kids need is us, right? At the end of the day, like, all the practices, all the strategies, they just need us to get clear with ourselves and be present for them. And if we can do that, we can always figure out the answer. So trust yourselves and keep asking questions. And thank you so much for spending some time with me. Thank you.